It was a chilly October evening when I received an unexpected phone call from an old friend, Sarah. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her words barely audible over the crackling line. "I need your help," she whispered urgently. "Something strange is happening at St. Agnes Orphanage." I felt a shiver run down my spine. St. Agnes Orphanage had always been a place of mystery in our small town. Nestled on the outskirts, its towering spires and Gothic architecture loomed ominously against the night sky. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep the unease out of my own voice. Sarah hesitated before responding, her words coming out in a rush. "I've been volunteering there for the past few weeks, and I can't explain it, but there's something not right about that place. Strange noises, flickering lights, and I swear I've seen figures moving in the shadows." My curiosity piqued. I agreed to meet Sarah at the orphanage that very night. As I drove through the deserted streets, a sense of foreboding settled over me like a heavy fog. When I finally arrived, Sarah was waiting for me outside, her face pale with fear. Together, we made our way through the iron gates and into the sprawling grounds of St. Agnes. The moon cast an eerie glow over the crumbling facades, and the wind whispered through the ancient trees like a ghostly lament. We entered the main building, its corridors echoing with the sound of our footsteps. Sarah led me to the dormitory where the orphans slept, her hand trembling as she pushed open the creaking door. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was in disarray, with beds overturned and sheets strewn across the floor. But it was the atmosphere that truly unnerved me. A palpable sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. "What happened here?" I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know, but I think we're not alone." Suddenly, a sound echoed through the darkness, a soft, plaintive wail that sent shivers down my spine. Sarah clutched my arm, her nails digging into my flesh. "We need to leave," she said, her voice quivering with fear. But before we could move, a figure emerged from the shadows, a young girl, her eyes wide and vacant, her pale face streaked with tears. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the din. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out to her, my hand trembling with fear. But before I could touch her, she vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but a lingering sense of dread. Sarah and I fled from the orphanage that night, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced through the deserted streets. But try as we might, we could not shake the feeling that we were being followed, that something malevolent lurked in the darkness, waiting to claim us as its own. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of the haunted orphanage from my mind. I became consumed by a desire to uncover the truth, to unravel the mystery of St. Agnes and the dark forces that dwelled within its walls. With Sarah's help, I began to dig deeper, scouring old newspapers and archives for any mention of the orphanage's troubled history. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. Tales of neglect and abuse, of children disappearing without a trace, their cries for help falling on deaf ears. But it was one story in particular that caught my eye, the tale of Sister Mary Elizabeth, a nun who had devoted her life to caring for the orphans of St. Agnes. According to legend, Sister Mary had gone mad in her final days, driven to insanity by the horrors she had witnessed within the orphanage's walls. Some said she still roamed the halls of St. Agnes, her tormented spirit unable to find peace in death. Others claimed she had made a pact with dark forces beyond our understanding, trading her soul for eternal power and immortality. As I delved deeper into Sister Mary's story, I became convinced that there was a connection between her and the strange occurrences at the orphanage. But try as I might, I could find no concrete evidence to support my theory, no proof that would satisfy the skeptics and naysayers. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to St. Agnes one fateful night, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sense of resolve. As I made my way through the deserted corridors, a sense of dread settled over me like a suffocating blanket, the air thick with the scent of decay and despair. I entered the dormitory where Sarah and I had encountered the ghostly apparition, my heart pounding in my chest as I braced myself for what lay ahead. But to my surprise, the room was empty, the beds neatly made, the air eerily still. I was about to leave when I heard it, a soft, plaintive wail that sent chills down my spine. I turned towards the sound, my flashlight illuminating the figure of a young girl standing in the shadows, her eyes wide with fear. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the din. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. The ghostly apparition was not a vengeful spirit, but a lost soul trapped between worlds, reaching out for help in the only way she knew how. With a newfound sense of determination, I reached out to the girl, my hand trembling with fear. But instead of vanishing into thin air, she took hold of my hand, her touch cold and clammy against my skin. Together, we fled from the orphanage, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced through the deserted streets. But as we reached the safety of the outside world, I knew that our journey was far from over, that the mysteries of St. Agnes Orphanage would continue to haunt me for years to come. As I looked back at the imposing facade of the orphanage, a chill ran down my spine. For in that moment, I knew that some secrets were meant to stay buried, and that the darkness that lurked within St. Agnes would never truly be vanquished. The rain pounded against the windows of my car as I navigated the winding roads leading to St. Veronica's convent. The sky was shrouded in darkness, and the only light came from the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the desolate landscape. I had received an urgent call from my friend Emily, who was a journalist investigating reports of strange occurrences at the convent. She claimed to have stumbled upon something sinister lurking within its walls and begged for my help. As I pulled up to the imposing gates of the convent, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy cloak. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of my footsteps as I made my way towards the entrance. Emily was waiting for me in the foyer, her face pale and drawn. She greeted me with a tight hug, her hands trembling with fear. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something not right about this place." I nodded in agreement, my own heart pounding in my chest. Together, we ventured deeper into the convent, our footsteps echoing through the dimly lit corridors. The atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive as we made our way towards the chapel at the heart of the building. The air was thick with the scent of incense and decay, and the walls seemed to close in around us like a vice. As we entered the chapel, a chill ran down my spine. The pews were empty, but the air was heavy with a sense of foreboding. I could almost feel the weight of centuries of prayers and whispered confessions pressing down upon me like a suffocating blanket. Emily led me to a small alcove at the back of the chapel, where a statue of the Virgin Mary stood bathed in flickering candlelight. She pointed to the statue's face, her voice trembling with fear. "Look," she whispered. I followed her gaze and felt my blood run cold. The statue's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, their expression one of sorrow and despair. But it was the feeling of being watched, of something unseen lurking in the shadows, that sent shivers down my spine. "We need to get out of here," Emily said, her voice urgent. But before we could move, a voice echoed through the darkness, a soft, plaintive wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. "Help me," it whispered, its words barely audible above the din. I turned towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing before us was a young nun, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The nun shook her head, her voice trembling with emotion. "There's something evil in this place, something that's been haunting us for centuries." She went on to tell us the story of Sister Agnes, a nun who had lived at the convent centuries ago. According to legend, Sister Agnes had made a pact with the devil in exchange for eternal youth and beauty. But when her dark secret was discovered, she was condemned to spend eternity wandering the halls of the convent, her tormented spirit unable to find peace in death. As the nun spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine. Could it be possible that Sister Agnes still haunted the halls of St. Veronica's, her malevolent presence wreaking havoc on all who dared to enter? Before I could ponder the thought further, a loud crash echoed through the chapel, sending us reeling backwards in terror. We turned towards the sound, our hearts pounding in our chests, only to find the statue of the Virgin Mary lying shattered on the ground, its once serene expression twisted into a grotesque grimace. With a sense of mounting dread, we fled from the chapel, our footsteps echoing through the deserted corridors. But try as we might, we could not shake the feeling that we were being followed. That something malevolent lurked in the darkness, waiting to claim us as its own. As we reached the safety of the outside world, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. The mysteries of St. Veronica's convent would continue to haunt me for years to come, their dark secrets lurking just beyond the edge of reason, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to seek the truth. The night was wrapped in a shroud of darkness, a thick blanket of clouds obscuring the moon and stars. Rain cascaded from the sky in torrents, drumming against the windows with relentless force. It was on a night like this that my phone buzzed with an urgency I couldn't ignore. A message from my childhood friend Emma flashed on the screen. "Please come quick. Something's wrong at Sacred Heart Convent," the message read, punctuated by a string of panicked emojis. My heart quickened its pace as I absorbed the words. Sacred Heart Convent, a place steeped in history and mystery, loomed large in my mind. What could be happening there on a night like this? Without a moment's hesitation, I grabbed my coat and keys, my mind buzzing with questions and anticipation. The rain beat against my windshield as I navigated the winding roads leading to the convent, the rhythmic sound soothing in its own way. When I arrived, Emma was waiting for me at the entrance, her face etched with worry. "Thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, her voice barely audible over the din of the storm. "We need to find Sister Grace. Something's not right with her." Together, we ventured into the dimly lit corridors of the convent, the rain-soaked ground squelching beneath our feet. The air was heavy with an oppressive sense of foreboding, as if the very walls themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. As we searched for Sister Grace, a chill crept into the air, sending shivers down my spine. I could feel eyes watching us from the shadows, their gaze filled with an otherworldly intensity. Suddenly a voice broke the silence, its tone low and menacing. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned to Emma, but she seemed frozen in place, her eyes fixed on something at the end of the hallway. As I followed her gaze, I saw a figure cloaked in darkness, its form barely discernible in the dim light. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that Sister Grace stood before us. Her eyes glazed over with an unnatural emptiness. "What's happening to her?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. But before Emma could respond, Sister Grace's demeanor changed, her movements becoming erratic and unpredictable. With a gut-wrenching scream, she lunged toward us, her hands outstretched as if reaching for something that only she could see. We stumbled backward in terror, our hearts racing with a primal fear that threatened to consume us whole. "We have to get out of here," Emma gasped, her voice trembling with emotion. But before we could make our escape, the lights flickered and died, plunging the corridor into darkness. Panic surged through me as I groped blindly for an escape, my fingers clawing at the cold stone walls in a desperate bid for freedom. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the hallway, illuminating the figure of a nun standing before us. But there was something off about her, something that sent chills down my spine. "Sister Grace?" I whispered, my voice trembling with uncertainty. The nun nodded, her eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. "I have been chosen," she declared, her voice echoing with a chilling certainty. "Chosen to serve the darkness." As the realization dawned on us, a sense of dread washed over me like a tidal wave. Sister Grace was no longer human, she was something else. With a primal scream, Emma turned and fled, her footsteps echoing in the darkness as she disappeared into the night. I wanted to follow her, to escape the horror that threatened to consume us both, but something held me back. I watched in horror as Sister Grace advanced toward me, her movements slow and deliberate. "You cannot escape," she hissed, her voice echoing in the empty corridor. "The darkness has chosen you." But I refused to surrender to despair. With a newfound resolve, I turned and fled into the darkness, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. As I raced through the labyrinthine corridors of the convent, I could feel the darkness closing in around me, its icy tendrils reaching out to ensnare me in its grasp. But I refused to give up hope, to surrender to the terror that threatened to consume me. With one final burst of strength, I burst through the doors of the convent and into the cool night air, my lungs burning with exertion as I raced toward the safety of the outside world. But as I looked back at the convent, I knew that the darkness would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And though I had escaped its clutches for now, I knew that its influence would never truly be gone. For the darkness had chosen me, and its grasp would haunt me until the end of days.